Great. I think we can get started. Let me continue adding people. Hi everyone. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn. Today we have Smriti with us. Most of you may have met Smriti at Interledger Summit. Smriti is I'm sharing. I've shared a doc in the chat. Smriti has done some incredible work. So I'll not take any more time from Smriti. Please feel free to take it from here.
Thanks, Vinil. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in. So I'll be presenting today for the next few minutes about the project that I've been doing since last year. Most of this was done last year. I'm now at the stage of writing out the final report. Just give me a moment to share my slides. Okay, I hope that's visible to everyone. Vinil,
Yeah.
do you? Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. So let's get started. Yeah. So the project that I've been working on, I've titled it Pinging Paradise. And I'm going to just start by, explaining that title, because the last time I presented this before a group, people were like, what does that mean? And why have you called it that? So the paradise part, I think, is kind of obvious from the picture you're seeing in front of you and the pictures you're going to see, in the coming slides. It is a really scenic, beautiful location. It is my home district, which is the subject area of the study. The pinging part, of course, as we know in communications parlance, right? When you want to know the reachability of a node, you send a ping to it and you get a response, so you know whether it's reachable, and the latency, how much time it took. So really, it's a metaphor to use that for the whole context of a community and say, is this a community that is reachable, and to what extent and in what manner do they engage with digital and financial services? So that was really the motivation of naming this project Pinging Paradise. So I'm going to jump with that into the outline of what I'll be covering today. So I'll briefly talk about the context and the motivation for the study. And in the context, I think it's a little relevant to explain both the context of the specific region, which is Lahaul and Spiti, which I'll talk about and try to, locate that on the map, but also the context of digital transformation and in India more generally, which I think will help you understand why some of those questions are being asked, and that's a part of the motivation. Then I'll go into the research questions. I'll go into the methodology of what I did. So some of this changed along the way from what I initially wanted to do and how things evolved over time, and I'll explain some of that. And finally, what are the findings that are emerging out of this study? So let's dive straight in with the context and the motivation. So more, generally stepping back from the selected region to look at India as a whole, I think the 2 points which are relevant to this study is to understand the state of digital connectivity, internet connectivity, and then to understand the developments around digital transformation, particularly centered around the way digital public infrastructure is being adopted in India over the past around 10 years or so. So the map you see there is, of the country. The little circle on the neck of it is the state that I come from and is the state of study, Himachal Pradesh. But look, stepping back from that and looking at some of the statistics for the country as a whole, you see in the chart here that, we are the second largest internet user base in the world in terms of, after China, India constitutes the second largest number of internet users. And that number has significantly jumped over the last 10 years, specifically after 2016, where we saw some change in market dynamics. We saw the entry of a new telecom operator, and that radically changed the way digital connectivity and internet connectivity has been shaping in India. And you can see that, about threefold jump, which has taken place over the last 10 years. So now it's over 900 million internet users, about 400 of whom are in the rural area. But just to note that, when we talk about a population of 1.4 billion, when we say 969 million, that is a significant number, but that just still tells you that there is a significant portion which is not yet using the internet. And a significant portion of that comes from the rural region, because as you see, the rural-urban divide is almost over equal. In fact, the urban segment is much higher, although a large part, still about 65% of the population of India lives in rural areas. So that divide between rural and urban areas still remains. There are also a lot of region-wise disparity in the state of access across the country. We unfortunately don't have granular data that comes out in a structured manner for, so we have this at the state level. So, there's, you see the map of India, you see the 28 states there, but we don't have it for the subunits of the districts within those states. And I'm studying one of those districts, but again, I'm not doing, a quantitative study which will give us these figures, but it's a qualitative study which will tell us more about the experiences of the community. But just again, before that, to talk about, so that was the overall state of internet adoption. On gender, this is a very useful report that is put out every year by the GSMA, and the statistics for India, as you can see, show that the mobile ownership, between men and women. So 85% of men they survey, 75% of women have a mobile phone, but the mobile internet usage for women is significantly lower, and that is a trend that is reflected across. I think all of South Asia, India, Bangladesh being particularly bad cases, with a 30% mobile internet user gap, but also across Africa. So that's really just something to keep in the backdrop of, which will help understand why, some of the questions that this research was asking seemed relevant. Moving on from there, this is a little bit of a snapshot on the strategy of digital transformation that we've been seeing in India. So, just to talk first about the state of financial inclusion, as per the World Bank's Global Findex Index, 78% of the adults who were surveyed in 2021 did have a bank account, and they didn't see a gender-wise gap on this. So it was, fairly evenly divided between men and women. But when it came to usage of the bank account, similar to the usage of the mobile phones, we see that women are less likely, 13% less likely to use. And we also see from the data that a lot of these bank accounts are dormant. So, although 78% have bank accounts, about 35% of them were not actively using these accounts, and only 35% of the adults were using it for receiving and sending digital payments. So really, you can see a lot remain to be done in terms of adoption of digital payments in that context. One of the solutions, and this is data from 2021, this is likely to have, significantly changed in the last few years because of the significant adoption of what we call the Unified Payments Interface. It is a public infrastructure that has been adopted. India has adopted a range of these in sectors like, digital identity, digital payments, etc. But I'll just talk briefly about UPI, which is sort of relevant to our interest and what we work on in this space. So in terms of UPI adoption, this is something that's been in operation since 2016. There are about 350 million active users on this. So again, correlate that with a population of 1.4 billion. Not everyone is using it, but those who are using it very, very actively. We are seeing 600 million daily transactions and about 18 billion monthly transactions. So it's a very, very popular user interface. And that really, will take me to, eventually, once I overcome the gap, yes, will take me to the region I'm studying, and then, eventually to the questions I'm studying. So about Lahaul Spiti, as I showed you, it is a part of the state called Himachal Pradesh in the north of India. It falls inside deep in the Himalayas. The map here is of the state, and you can see the different districts of that. On top of that, which is the shaded region, is the state of Lahaul Spiti. It is the largest in terms of area, the largest district in the state in terms of area. It is a high altitude district, so we're talking about 10,000 to 14,000 feet above sea level. But in terms of population, it is very sparsely populated. So it has a very vast area, but the density is only 2 people per square kilometer. So, it comes with all those challenges of high altitude, high mountains, sparsely populated. So of course, that raises unique questions about connectivity and how do you give access. And the other interesting part about the region is that the majority of the population belongs to what we call in India the scheduled tribes. It's a constitutionally protected group, demarcated on the basis of historic backwardness, historic marginalization, and also on the basis of uniqueness of, the cultural aspects of the community. So based on these criteria, certain regions across the country have been demarcated as tribes because they have this distinct culture, which is different from the neighboring regions and other parts of the state. And Lahaul Spiti happens to be one of them. Just administratively, these are 2 regions. So what you see on the right side is the Lahaul region. On the left side is the Spiti region. They are very different in terms of topography, in terms of language as well. But for administrative reason, they have been clubbed together into one district. I did cover both in the course of my study. So moving on from there, to the motivation. So what I've presented in the first few slides, a lot of this was about aggregate statistics. Like we're talking about 900 million internet connections. We're talking about, millions of daily transactions. And that is, of course, staggering. And it gives the impression that there is very deep penetration of digital services. But the interesting question to ask there is, of course, who is using these services and how equitable is this distribution and usage? And that's where this study comes in, taking into account that the literature shows us that tribal regions are in generally understudied, because whenever long, big surveys are happening, these are hard to access regions, these are remote language distinctions. All of these reasons cause them to be, an understudied regions. We also know from the literature that human development indicators around health, education, etc., fare poorer in these regions, and including on formal financial services, the adoption is poorer in these regions, again for the reasons of remoteness, etc. And the other interesting motivation, of course, is the role of the community. So even though one may say tribal regions and talk about this as an example of a tribal region, there's actually a lot of diversity within each tribal region, depending on what are the cultural practices, what are the rituals of that particular community. And therefore, it becomes really important and interesting to study some of these communities in isolation and not, try to extrapolate some of what we might know about the rest of the country to these unique regions. So that's really the motivation. And of course, the personal motivation, as I said, is because, I am a native of the region. So I'm going to jump with that into, what are the research questions that I was pursuing. The first one is, the most basic question about what is the current state of connectivity in the region, which is really the base on which you would think about other things about, how services are being used, what services are being used. Before any of that can happen, we need to know whether there is internet access and what is the kind of access and what are the pockets of access and lack of access. So that was really the first research question. The second question is really the meat of the analysis, is that when we think about the community, it consists of several parts. So how do some of these different parts, whether they are women, whether they are small businesses, whether they are agriculturists, how do some of these subcomponents of the community engage with digital and financial services? What services are they using? And again, as I said, it's a qualitative study, so it is based on, it's not generalizable. It's based on the experiences of those people that I spoke to, but it does give us a flavor of, the experiences of people in the region more broadly. And finally, the third step is to think about, not just to study the region in isolation, but really what can you take back from some of the experiences that are revealed by the study, and can they tell us something about how we pursue the digital financial inclusion and think about the use of technology for solving social problems at scale in other parts of the country as well as other parts globally, taking into account some of the remote experiences. So with that, I will jump into what was done and how. So the methodology really consisted of three parts. The first part was a preparatory workshop that we held in New Delhi in May last year. And Vinil was part of that workshop. The objective there was really, I presented some of the early ideas of the research, the motivation, some of the research questions that I was framing, and it was about bouncing those ideas off from a community of researchers and practitioners in India who think and work on areas of digital and financial inclusion. So that was the main idea, but we also used that opportunity to introduce the group to the idea of Interledger, its grant opportunities, etc. So it was, in that sense, an icebreaker with the community of researchers in India, many of whom were not already aware about the Interledger Foundation. So drawing upon that, there were two field visits that happened in the two regions, in Spiti first and then in Lahaul. In July, I went to Spiti, spent about 10 days there. In September to Lahaul, again, similarly, spent about 9 to 10 days there, driving around the region, visiting different villages. The sampling methodology. So initially, the plan was a bit ambitious, and what I had done was, with some help from Santosh, who was a former ambassador, done a mapping of the region based on where are the telecom towers located across the district. So we did a mapping to try and identify, based on data put out by the government and by the telecom industry, on where are the areas where telecom towers are located, and to use that as a basis to see, select the samples of villages which would be studied. But of course, as I went onto the ground, I realized it was very, very difficult and challenging to do in terms of, actually locating the villages was not hard, but really going to villages and finding people who were willing to speak and willing to engage was hard, especially in the Spiti side, because actually I come from the Lahaul side. I had never been to the Spiti side myself. So it was really an eye-opening visit for me in many ways. So deeply personal and important in that way also. But it was a language barrier. It was a barrier of trust. And it wasn't easy to just go up to people in different villages and say, that's my sampling methodology. And I want to speak to 5 villages here and 6 villages here. So in the end, it ended up being a mix of convenience and purposive sampling. What that means was, the convenience sampling was whoever I could reach out and whoever was willing to speak. So very often these were people who were operating homestays, people running shops, people running roadside stalls for food, what we call dhabas in India. So a lot of them were small business owners, but also through contacts, through people, managed to reach out to some of the local bank officials, one of the schools, one of the largest schools in the region, the local elected representative of the region. So there was purposive sampling, and I did try to take into account areas where there is connectivity and there is not. So even though that's not, the core part of the sampling methodology, I did manage to visit a few of the areas which are still not connected. The other very interesting group that came on board was Mahila Mandal. So this refers to village level women's collectives that exist in, every village with membership from all the women in the household. They pool in a small amount of money every month and they work towards, the betterment of the community. So it could be for social causes, cleanliness in the village, for helping with public health interventions. So these are very well established groups in India, certainly in the state of Himachal. And in 3 of the villages, I managed to reach out to these Mahila Mandals, and that was a really interesting group interaction. So, as opposed to the first segment where it was very one-on-one interviews, the second segment happened to be a lot of group interactions with women from these collectives, usually with about 20 on an average people from each group. And the other interesting convening place, which you see in the picture here, was monasteries. So I actually ended up visiting 3 monasteries, which is a place where people convene for religious, but also for cultural, and other reasons. And one of the convenings was around a cultural festival was being held, and a lot of women were sitting. So the sense of community is strong, as I said. And a lot of women, whenever there is such a festival or event happening, one person from each household will volunteer to come and cook for the community, to come and you do the common chores for everyone. So in that process, I managed to spend a lot of time with the women who were working while peeling vegetables. They were peeling the vegetables, I was talking to them and asking them some of my questions. So it was really, in that sense, a mix of different venues that came about. In some cases, went to people's homes, went to people's offices, and those were the venues in which the interviews were held. The final part of the methodology, as I said, was to understand what is the state of connectivity. And for that, I used the Ookla speed testing app on 2 devices. We're using multiple SIMs. So I used the 3 main networks, Reliance Jio, Airtel, and BSNL, which is a state-owned operator. And the idea was to, wherever I was visiting, I was running speed tests on these mobile devices to see both along the highways to get to these villages, as well as at the, the rural center once I get there, what is the state of connectivity, and is it good enough for supporting a lot of the services that we use in our, day-to-day life. So with that, I'm going to jump into discussing, what were some of the findings from the study. So on the first question, the state of connectivity, I think it's useful to get a bit of a historical context. So before 2016, as I said, there was very patchy connectivity across the country, not just in this region. Most of the people who were using internet were using 2G or some cases 3G services, but internet access was expensive. That changed drastically in 2016 with the entry of a new player called Reliance Jio. And this player entered this region in around 2019, 2020, basically around the COVID period is when they laid their infrastructure in this region. And that has led to a really drastic change in the situation. So the pre-2020 position was that in most parts of the region, except in the district headquarters, in some pockets, where you had service available for network connectivity, you did not have access to it, let alone the internet. You didn't even have mobile phone access. So you couldn't even make calls in a lot of places, or it was patchy. The network was patchy and it wasn't sustained. That has drastically changed since 2020. And in most of the regions that I visited, there was very good internet speed. Certainly in the bigger regions, in the district headquarters, and other areas surrounding that, but also in some of the remote regions. But I did go to a few valleys where this had not happened. And interesting, one of the cases that had not happened was because of COVID related fears. The village community in one valley told the internet operator not to come to their village to lay down the infrastructure and to lay down the fiber. And as a result of it, they ended up laying down fiber all around, but that particular valley remained unconnected. And what is happening now, as I went for the fieldwork, the state-owned operator BSNL was, laying down the connectivity, because I think it wasn't commercially viable for that the main commercial operator to come back and lay it. And the state-owned operator, of course, has certain universal service obligations and has access to those funds. So they were the ones who were trying to now lay down the infrastructure to connect this village. So it is a mix of what was the supply side issue and then what happened to be the demand side issue in that particular context, which led to this region, this valley remaining unconnected. But there were pockets of underconnectivity across the study area. So as you can see, the picture up on the slide, it's a notice from the government saying that, if you're going beyond this point, please call your friends and family and say that you will not have access to the internet, because it very often happens that the weather goes bad and people are stuck for this long patch in the middle where there's no internet, and then the cops get involved, you're sending search parties, etc. So they are putting out that disclaimer that, you will not have connectivity beyond this point. And again, throughout the fieldwork, I saw everywhere there is a lot of infrastructure work still going on. There is a lot of cables being laid, particularly from the government side of it. So I think in the next 5 years, if someone to repeat this study and do the speed testing, the results might be very different. But as things remain, there are pockets of underconnectivity, and including some villages that remain underconnected. And the interesting observation there was, there is this sense of relative deprivation which has come in, because most villages are now connected, and the ones which are not, they feel it all the more stark. Whereas pre-2020, the whole region was not connected. So it was kind of a normal thing to not be connected. But now the fact that everyone else is connected, and there are very few regions which are inaccessible, remote, and therefore have remained underconnected, and that has created this. So people from that village, for instance, said that our children couldn't come home during COVID to do remote work, although everyone else was able to do that because we didn't have connectivity. So in the years before that, you would think about very basic things like you can't call a doctor, and those were the needs. But as everyone started getting connected, the expectations changed, and the idea of remote working, that became the basic need for many people in the group. In terms of the digital experiences, as I said, it was interesting to look at different groups. And one of the interest groups, of course, was, the women in the region. So thanks to the interactions through the Mahila Mandals, as well as some of the one-on-one interviews, the idea was to try and understand to what extent who is using digital and financial services. And the finding was that in most cases, the younger women are using mobile phones, of course, but they're using smartphones, and they are using payment apps on their phones. So they are very comfortable, very familiar. As you grow older, go down that scale, women who are older very often are not educated, or they've studied only very basic things under the adult literacy programs that the government runs. So they can sign their names, they can do some basic banking transactions, but they are not literate either digitally or otherwise to be able to use mobile phones or use smartphones. In terms of phone ownership, the other interesting thing was that, again, that age divide showed up. The younger women, a lot of them were using smartphones. Among the older women, a lot of them had the hand-me-down phones from within the family. So as someone younger in the family got a new smartphone, the old feature phone was given to the family member. So it was one, a capacity and comfort issue, but it was also, an access to the device issue in some cases where people didn't have a phone on which they could do WhatsApp. In terms of the usage patterns, of course, the basic use for people was communications. And as people got more sophisticated, so to speak, or more aware or more used to it, then you saw things like, the WhatsApp and Facebook were the first layers that people were adopting. And then as you went down, it was YouTube. And then finally, digital payments was actually the last, because there was this barrier of, what would happen when things go wrong. There were also when, the news of scams spreading fast. So if someone in the community had faced a scam, that word had spread within others, and that had led to fears that there is this likelihood that you could lose all your money or lose a lot of money. So that was also deterring. The trust factor was also deterring financial adoption among women, but also among men. Like I met this person who actually had a mobile tower installed in his premises, but he himself was not carrying a phone because he lost his mobile phone twice. And he said, now I just don't trust this, because once you lose your phone, you lose everything. So I'm just stopped keeping a mobile phone. So really weird reaction. And I said, isn't the reaction to be more careful about your mobile phone? And he was like, no, I don't, none of that for me, like just no mobile phone for me, sort of thing. So it was interesting, and probably not the reactions one would expect, in a city when people use phones, you just usually get a new one. Going to the small business, let me just see how we are on the time. Okay, yeah. Going to the experience of some of the small businesses, there was, very widespread adoption of UPI in particular. So everywhere you went into these small dhabas, into these small stalls, you would see the QR code being put up there. But the also interesting part there was very often people were, when you spoke to them, they had the QR code put up, and you would assume that, they are very digitally savvy and they're comfortable with digital payments, but they were only comfortable with receiving the payments. So they were comfortable putting up a QR code where someone else can scan and put it out, but they were never doing transactions where they were making the payment. So the money would go into their bank account, but they would then physically go to the branch and physically operate the account. But the payment interface, the QR code, became a gateway for them to receive the money. So that again shows this graded level of trust in digital payments and in their own confidence to engage with digital payments. But the interesting part was, like, none of the people that I spoke to, like, there was no one who was unaware about the fact that there is something called UPI. Very often they would use it synonymously, as you can see the picture here, with PhonePe, which is one of the largest third-party apps which, provides a UPI interface, or with Google Pay. Very often people were using Android phones, and Google became logically kind of the first port of call when they were moving to digital payments. So people did not necessarily know about what is UPI, what is the system, what is digital infrastructure, but they did know the system in terms of its direct interface and the companies through which they were interfacing with the system. That was something people, even if they were not using it, even amongst the older women that I was talking about earlier, they had family members who were using it, and they were familiar with it. So for instance, one lady who was a grandmother said that her son, her grandson lives in a city, and she doesn't know or how to send money to him, but so she takes cash and gives it to her son and daughter-in-law whenever she wants to send him a gift. So she gives cash to her family members, and they use their phones, and they kind of make that transmission on their behalf. So everyone kind of knew and was familiar with it, but the comfort of using it varied from person to person. The last group, I think, which was interesting to me and I hadn't thought about in my original design, was that as I went through the region, came across a lot of people who are not from the district but were there as migrant workers, seasonal workers, working either on road construction. There's a lot of infrastructure development happening. The road laying work is going on, from all the way from Manali to Spiti, but also people working on farms. As there has been prosperity in some pockets, people have kind of contracted out a lot of their work, or their fields are too large and they use a lot of contract workers. And the interesting question there was, again, what is the payments interface that they're using? So for the contract workers, they said that a lot of people are making payments to them in their fields in UPI. So the UPI, often the payments are going directly to their family members. So they may be from a state of Bihar and Jharkhand very often, or a lot of the migrant workers are from the neighboring country of Nepal. And in case of the domestic workers, a lot of times they want the money to go straight away to the families. They don't want to have that hassle of taking the money, going to a bank, wire transferring it, because the bank branches are far away and few. So they would tell the person who's hiring them to just directly transfer it to their wife or family member back home. So, but when it came to people from outside the country, very often they would get the payments in cash in a lump sum. So, some of the workers that we see on the screen, they were people from Nepal. And when I asked them, how does your payment happen? They said, we are on contract for about 3-4 months. We would be at a stretch working in these areas. So we don't really need money, because the food is usually taken care of by the contractor. The accommodation in tents is taken care of by the contractor. So at the end of their stint, they would get a lump sum of money, and they would then use that through informal channels, very often not through bank accounts, but through informal channels of money remittance payment operators, and transfer it through those what they were comfortable with, and call them their trusted networks, and transfer that either, or take them cash back home if they're going, or transfer to family members at the end of a couple of months. With that, I think, to summarize some of the learnings, one of the ideas that emerged was that there is this phased character of the technological diffusion. So, starting from the younger men to the elderly women, there is a spectrum of adoption. And within that, there is variations about which services people are comfortable adopting. And of course, basic communications being the first port of call and financial apps being the last, because of the chances of something going wrong being much higher and the trust factor being lower with the engagement with the financial system. The other interesting point which emerged was the community as a unit of financial inclusion. Very often, when we think of financial inclusion, we think about the individual, or we think about the family, or we think about the business. But really, what jumped out in this research was the community as a unit. So, when I asked one of the owners of a homestay where I was staying that, if you want to send money to your kids who are studying outside, how do you do it? Because he was not he was receiving but not sending payments on UPI. And he said, I asked my neighbor who's savvy and who's really comfortable. And I said, but you're doing this every month. Like, don't they get irritated? And he said, no, that's the whole idea of a community. Like, he laughed at me saying, how could you even think someone would get irritated? Because where I live in Delhi, right under my house, there's a shop and it does the same service, but it takes a commission. So you can go there, people who don't know how to use UPI go there all the time, and it's a chemist store and they ask them to make payments on their behalf, but the shop charges a commission. But in the sense of community, like, it was unthinkable that, someone would not help you out and help you facilitate the transaction. The other interesting point was, one of the villages I went to was called Demul, and it's an unconnected village, but everyone there is running a homestay. So usually in the Spiti side, it's very common that in every given house, you would have one or two rooms where they are commercially operating as a homestay. And they're running a homestay without being connected to the internet. And I asked someone, how does that work? How is that even possible? And they said, there is someone from the village who lives in the bigger village, which is connected, and he handles the bookings for the whole community. So the tourist will just come to the village, and in circulation, depending on whose turn it is, will stay at different houses. So they don't get to see the specific room or the specific house that they would stay in. And every community member gets a turn to host a tourist depending on, when it's their turn in circulation. And that was, again, a community form of digital and financial inclusion. And finally, the local networks as a source of trust. A lot of women said they don't feel the need for going into using apps or using this, because whatever their needs are very well met by going to the local branch, and those branches are served by, they are usually cooperative banks or the public sector banks, and they are, the staff working there are people from the same community. So if they don't understand something, they explain it really well to them. So they didn't feel the need, and they didn't feel they were missing out on anything by not being on the apps and not doing financial transactions online, because they felt it was not a need for them. And finally, concluding with this, this is, as per the poster, you would see there's a picture there, which is supposed to be the world's highest post office, an area called Hikim, and also an unconnected region. And you see they've made this very cute post office there. It's a very big tourist attraction. You can take photos with, they made a photo spot, etc. But I sent 2 postcards from there to, my niece and nephew and to my family members, and they never reached. Right. And I think for me, the one interesting takeaway from this, which I'm relating to in some way with the idea of digital infrastructure, with the idea of digitization, is that just having a swanky, outer face and the user interface is not always going to ensure that the package or the packets in our universe are going to reach that last mile, are going to reach that user. There is a lot more that needs to work for all of that to fall into place. So there is obviously a story of, hope coming out of the way connectivity has improved, the way people have adopted digitization, way people are helping each other take on digitization. But there is also a story of humility, which I think is the larger lesson which needs to come from this experience to feed into the digital landscape in India. Because a lot of time when you see the narrative, certainly coming out of the public, the narrative are coming out of the government, it is as if these problems have been solved, and as if through digital infrastructure we have solved for financial inclusion, solved for connectivity. And I think that is a point to just think about and pause and reflect on, and realize from these experiences that not every time when you have an interface is it working, or is it working equally for everyone. So I'm going to, I think, end with that, and would be happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Stephanie, yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. It's really, really interesting, Smriti. I'm just wondering do you think you can extrapolate from this region to other villages? What kind of, I mean, I know you went to 3 monasteries. Are these people all Tibetan Buddhists, for instance? Do they have a kind of cohesiveness as a community that might not be present in other groups? Just wondering about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. There is a very strong sense of community. So the Spiti part is, most of the region is Buddhist, but the Spiti part is more strictly practicing Buddhist. So the role of the monastery, the role of the monks is much stronger in that region. And I think it is a valuable factor to, you know, how people engage with each other. It's part of the rituals and the customs of the community. I think religion is a big part of it. I would say for that reason, you can't really necessarily extrapolate everything that we've learned here to every other region. You know, so I want to give an example. One of the experience, and this is a non-religious example, but one of the villages that I went to, it was really, really, really far from the, you know, the main bigger villages. And they said every day when the bus comes there, it's the last stop. And in circulation, the bus driver doesn't go back because it's so far. The bus driver sleeps in that village in circulation in the house of one of the village members. And the next morning, the same bus goes back. So it gives, you know, the commute for the people becomes so much easier, and they accommodate the bus driver because he's giving them the service. And this, I think, in most parts of the world, certainly in most parts of India, is not something you would see happening, because, you know, once there is prosperity or once there isn't a strong sense of community, there's no way people are having, you know, a stranger come and sleep in circulation in the house. They will have their own cars or they will carpool. And so there is that. Yeah, to answer your question in brief, I think there is a strong sense of community, and in that sense, some of the results are unique coming from that.
And the other question I have, I mean, Canada can't manage to put fiber down 50 miles from the capital, let alone in these, that must be a very difficult terrain to lay fiber in, I would think. I mean, you visited in the summer, presumably in the winter it's cold, right? And who paid for all that? Surely that company can't be making enough money off what it's charging.
Yeah, so that's an interesting part. So until 2020, it was all paid from, you know, we have the Universal Service Obligation Fund where every operator puts in a small amount. So most of the connectivity that was happening, which was poor and patchy, was happening through that fund. This operator has actually, it's cross subsidizing. Okay, it's really, really done well across the country. So I don't think they're thinking about isolated pockets as you know, that I will need to make money from this valley. It's a very large conglomerate. It's one of the biggest business houses, industry houses in India. So they, you know, they are in retail, they are in industries, they're in petroleum. So they have a lot of money, and they have, through this strategy, managed to kind of, you know, in 5 years capture 50-60% of the market. So they are probably not profiting from this region. They have laid optic cable. In most cases, it is overhead because it gets snowed in, and very often there are landslides, there are, you know, floods happening. So for all those reasons, the old operator did face challenges where every year they would have to kind of relay fiber and refix their infrastructure. But they're taking that cost hit. Yeah, the company has taken that cost hit.
And they didn't have to promise the government that they would honor the universal service principle.
That everyone does. So out of their total,
okay.
you know, revenues, every provider has to give a fixed percent. I think it's 3%, which goes to the universal fund. But it's not correlated to this specific area, although one of the purposes of the universal fund is connectivity in remote areas, but they didn't benefit from that.
Okay, thanks. Really, really interesting studies, really fascinating.
Thank you.
CD, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Smriti. Really insightful and interesting stuff. I was curious about, I'll say, research methodology for lack of or part of it at least, for lack of a data collection approach. Just like taking into consideration that the one of the observations was that there's such a strong sense of community or like communal interdependency. Did you find that I don't want to call them the subjects of the research, but the people you ended up speaking to, like who were willing to share some of their experiences, was there like an effect where, okay, if this person is willing to talk to you, then let me introduce you to these other people? Or, so how did you end up being able to talk to several folks? Was it because you had sort of a connection with one person that was then well connected? Or was it each sort of like a cold conversation, just approaching a stranger and hoping to have something meaningful?
It was a mixed bag, and it was more challenging than I had kind of imagined it would be. So on the Lahore side where I come from, it was relatively easier because I speak the language which is spoken by the majority of the people. And once you start doing that, I think instantly there is this element of trust and people were more willing to talk or intrigued by, who is this person who's speaking our language and asking these questions. So that I think that side was easier. And the Spiti side was harder. It was a mix of strategies. So through someone, I managed to get a contact in a bank, and they introduced me to some of their customers. They took me around some of the, the market and introduced me some of the shops there. So that happened. Where I stayed, it was just like, I think they felt obliged to talk to me. So some of the homestay owners were nice and they spoke, or where we stopped to eat, people were just nice and they were kind of willing to have that conversation. So it was a mix of strategy. The Mahila Mandals, I went through a government research institute where I knew someone who worked, and they were doing some work with these groups where they are helping them produce forest produce, capture forest produce, do some monetization around that. So it was through that network. So again, became a trusted network, and therefore they were willing to speak. So it was really a mix of cold calling. Sometimes people not comfortable. So very often I recorded the conversation, but some people would say, this is just weird. Like, if you want to talk to me, just talk to me and don't record the conversation. So that also happened. And it was a mix of experiences.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'm also just curious. So, okay, I think then I understand that some of the doors were opened by more formalized institutions, like in the bank example. Was there any approaching a stranger in public? Were there any of those types of meeting and conversation initiations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of the, like even wherever we made a stop, right? If you were making like a tea stop or wherever, these were just like small markets, so to speak, where I would just go to a couple of stores down there and say, hey, I'm a researcher, I'm studying this. But the thing to know about this region in general is that, I'm saying this even though I come from it, but it's a region of very mild, very nice people. I think that's true of most hilly regions and the mountain regions in India. So it's not a region where you see a lot of people being suspicious of outsiders. They are very welcoming and warm. So I think I had the advantage of that. And of course, being a semi-local did help. So yeah, and with some of the construction workers, because the car was stopped for very, very long, for 1-2 hours, because they would block the roads because construction work was going on. So I would just step out and start talking to them and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm a researcher. Are you willing to talk for a few minutes? And in most cases, people were more than happy to do that.
Amazing. Thank you. I have one more question, but I'll just hold on and see if anybody else wants to ask.
I have one question. So it's amazing to see the opening of homestays through them coordinating to someone who was sitting at a bigger village who was making bookings for them and things like that. Have you seen any other businesses opening up or entrepreneurs doing such things because of opening up of digital opportunities?
So one of the interesting things which came up in the interaction with the Mahila Mandals was that, some of the more entrepreneurial women from that were, they had a WhatsApp group in which they were coordinating. So wherever there's a trade fair taking place outside, so most of the women, I don't know if you noticed in the picture, everyone knits, right? In the region, there is a particular pattern of socks from the region, and everyone knits. So no one goes to a wedding, to a social function, to a meeting, to anything without their knitting. So women are knitting all the time. And some of the younger women take this produce and they have been attending trade fairs in other parts of the state and also in bigger cities like Delhi, where and they coordinate. Sometimes this is facilitated by government agencies, or sometimes it's just voluntarily facilitated through NGOs, where they are coordinating on WhatsApp on when is the next location, where is it happening, who will go from which village, and taking turns and going and selling some of the produce in these groups.
Awesome, thank you. Stephanie has a question. Where do they get the wool?
Oh, so the area is now actually very well integrated. Again, before 2020, the situation was totally different, because whenever come winter, the region would get shut off. It would get snowed in and it would get shut off for about 5 to 6 months. It would be totally inaccessible. And that was also the period of no connectivity. So it was a very, very harsh life. What happened in 2020 is that all year tunnel route has been opened up. So for the stretch which used to, the mountain pass which used to get snowed in, an alternate route has been opened. So really people, except for a few weeks when the weather is really terrible, people are mobile. Buses are running, cabs are running. So in that sense, they have, and there are shops even in some of the bigger pockets, the big district headquarter, and some of the markets across different parts of the region. So getting basic facilities, fresh vegetables, etc., could become a challenge at some points, but things like shoes and clothes and wool are not really a challenge.
So this isn't locally spun yarn and nothing,
People do that as well. People do that as well, but it's much more expensive. So a lot of the knitting which is being done for selling is happening through, the commercial nylon, etc. When you want to gift to people, it's usually the special thing where people would do it with hand spun yarn.
Right, thanks.
CD, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks, Vinil. Okay. Smriti, my last question was, you mentioned, and please correct me sort of if I took away not exactly what you were saying, that UPI as a phrase, or like as tech or infrastructure, wasn't necessarily how people refer to what they use, and I wonder if you've made any observations about whether this is different in a more urbanized setting, whether sort of this, I don't know if it's not awareness or maybe not necessarily you referring to UPI, might have been because of the region or like the location of where the study was, versus being in a, in a commercial hub where folks are actually sort of referencing UPI, which is actually infrastructure, not really a particular service that they use directly. So I'm just wondering if there was a difference, or if you've observed that to be different depending on where you are.
Yeah. So my guess, of course, I haven't gone with the survey to other regions, so I can't say definitively, but my guess is you're absolutely right. So when I would go out in Delhi, like, we're using UPI for everything every day. When I take an auto rickshaw or I'm buying from the vegetable vendor, we would refer to it as UPI, and it's very normal. The guy would say UPI to me. So I do notice that, the idea is clearer in the minds of people that they're using an infrastructure which is called UPI. But my guess is in most rural areas, it is going to be similar, where people are not really engaging with the infrastructure, but only with the direct, third-party app that they interface with. And there the distinction gets a bit blurry.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Stephanie.
I can't let you get away without asking a question about privacy. Did you ask people if they had any views on it by any chance? Are they aware of the issues? You did mention the cybercrime issue. I'm just wondering if they're concerned about their personal information. Clearly not in the local communities, but once you start sending things outside.
Yeah, so I didn't really have a specific question on privacy. I did ask, as you said, around questions of trust in the financial system and trust in the context of fraud, really more in terms of harms in that context. So I didn't really, because I just thought like to add that layer and to be able to explain well. And, I thought it would be a challenge. So left that out, although that would be a very interesting thing to learn.
I think it would be a challenge, though. I mean, the minute you bring it up, people get suspicious. So,
Yeah.
I totally understand. You'll have to go back and ask.
Any final questions before we conclude? Going once, going twice. Great. Thanks so much, Smriti, for joining in and sharing your research. I think it's quite eye-opening in terms of understanding what's happening in that part of the world. And thanks for taking time to be part of this lunch and learn.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Vanila, and thanks everyone for joining and for your questions. The report should be out in a couple of weeks, I would say. So would love to hear your thoughts when you get a chance to read it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.